Well, it's good to be with all of you here at End Times with Pastor Eric. Today we're going to be answering the question, is the rapture imminent? And we're going to be looking at some of the implications of our understanding of the Olivet Discourse that we've been looking at for the last few weeks. So let me get started straight away. I'm going to pull up my pointer, get all ready to go here. I want to begin by giving the definition of what imminence is. In my opinion, there's been a lot of misunderstanding as to what the doctrine of imminence even is among evangelicals today. I think we've really lost even a rudimentary understanding of the doctrine of imminence. So let me begin by giving you a couple of criteria that I think are necessary in order for an event like the rapture and the day of the Lord to be imminent. Number one, two things must be true if an event can be called imminent. That is, number one, the event is certain to happen. We have to have an event that is certain to happen in order for it to be imminent. As I'm going to show you, the coming of Christ is a certain event. Why? Because Jesus, who is God, has promised us that he will return again. The second thing that must be true for an event to be imminent is that the timing of the event is unknown. What's very interesting is we see both of these things are true in the Olivet Discourse, right where you have what I say is the discourse marker peri. For example, Matthew 24, verses 34 through 35. Notice here Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." Notice what Jesus is authenticating there in blue is the veracity of his word, that indeed his coming will happen. It's a certain event. Why? Because Jesus' name is at stake. All right? Well, notice that would correspond nicely to number one, the event is certain to happen. But notice number two, the timing of the event is unknown. We have that in the very next verse. Verse 36, what I'm claiming is that now concerning his peri. It's a discourse marker. The Greeks used it to show us a change of topic, like a paragraph change, a paragraph break, right? So now concerning, what is he going to answer? He's going to answer the first question. When will these things be? That is, when is the 70th week of Daniel as a whole going to come? He says what? No one knows. Now concerning the day and the hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. That's what leads to the doctrine of imminence. Number one, the event is certain to happen. Jesus says it will happen. My words will not pass away. It'll be certain to happen. It'll come upon this generation. He's affirming that. Okay? Number two, the event, as far as the timing is concerned, the timing of the event is unknown. Well, that's exactly what you have in verse 36. No one knows the day or the hour, meaning no single human being can know when the rapture and the parousia of the Lord is. Not a single human being. Anyone who tells you they know is lying, or they're confused. They have no idea. All right. Now, by the way, this is a strong objection against preterism. Preterists insist that this generation in the Olivet Discourse means that the events of the parousia had to happen within the lifespan of Jesus' contemporaries. That is not true, because Jesus himself did not know when he was going to return, at least in his humanity, and that's how he revealed it in this passage. So God the Father alone knows when this is going to happen. So yes, certainly the parousia, the coming of Christ, is an unknown event. And therefore, it's also a certain event. Therefore, it's also an imminent event. That's the point. It's unknown as to when it's going to occur, but it is certain to occur. Therefore, it is imminent. Let me address a few errors that I hear people making when they talk about the rapture and how it can't be imminent. A lot of times they'll say, well, especially the preterists, they say, well, this hasn't happened in 2,000 years, and how can an event be imminent if it hasn't happened within 2,000 years? An imminent event does not have to occur within any certain time frame. Okay, let me say that again. An imminent event does not have to occur within any certain time frame. It can occur at any moment, but it does not have to occur with any certain time frame within it. There's no, so it could happen 5 seconds from now, it could be 500 years from now. We have no idea. It is always at hand. The second error that I've heard people make is they'll say, well, an imminent event certainly can't have anything else that occurs prior to it. Well, that's true in a sense, but listen carefully, okay? An imminent event does not require any precursor to come before it. Okay, so if an event must have a precursor that happens prior to it, it is not an imminent event. But that does not mean other events will not occur prior to it. Okay, again, what am I saying? An imminent event can occur at any time, and there's no precursor, there's no event that must occur prior to it, but that does not mean that events won't occur prior to it. Are you with me? An imminent event is simply one that is certain to come, and you have no idea when it's coming. That's what we have at the Parousia, the coming of Jesus Christ. That's why it's an imminent event. Now, what I want to do is show you how that's implied by Matthew's chiasm. Remember, Jesus was answering the question by the disciples on the Mount of Olives when they asked, there was really two questions. First, they asked, when will these things happen? Here's the second question, and what will be the sign of your parousia that's coming, and of the end of the age? Remember, I said the end of the age was assumed to be happening at his parousia, so it's really just one question here in blue. So with this one question, when will these things happen? And then you have a second question, what will be the sign of your coming? What Jesus does is he answers the second question first. From Matthew 24, 4 through 35, Jesus answers the second question about the signs. And so all of the signs are there, whether they're wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, the abomination that causes desolation, whether it's the sun, moon, and stars being darkened, the sign of the Son of Man himself. All of those are signs all found within this section. Why? Because Jesus is answering the second question first. But then all of a sudden he comes to a discourse marker, peri. That's in verse 36, and it tips you off that Jesus is now switching subjects. It is a subject that is certainly related, yet it is distinct. Now he begins to answer the first question, when will these things happen? That is, when does the 70th week come, and when is the beginning, therefore, of the day of the Lord? Remember, the 70th week is the beginning of the day of the Lord. Well, then the answer is you can't know. 4 or 5 different ways Jesus says you can't know. It's like the days of Noah that came suddenly. It's like a master who's gone from his home and you have no idea when he's returning. It's like a thief who comes unexpectedly. You have no idea. So you literally go from signs that you can know all of a sudden to the beginning of the 70th week, which you can't know. And so that's what creates the doctrine of imminence in this text. Matthew 24, verses 4 through 35, that's in this section. You have signs you can know. Matthew 24, 36 through 51, the beginning of the 70th week, you have no idea. That's why it's an imminent event. Brothers and sisters, if you don't see this chiastic structure, imminence will never make any sense inside the Olivet Discourse. Why? Because you'll be going from signs, things you can know, all of a sudden to things that you can't know. And obviously you can't have signs that you can know and then have signs, no signs, and that you can't know at the same time in the same relationship. Something has changed. All right, and what accounts for it is the discourse marker peri. Now, what I want to show you next is that peri is in fact biblical. In fact, I'm going to take it right from the Greek. I am just wanting to do somersaults, stand on my head, do anything I can to drill home the idea to all of you out there that indeed peri is biblical, that you have a change of subject in Matthew 24:36. And so what I thought I would do is just take the examples, there's many of them in the New Testament, right from the Greek New Testament. So let's put some of them up on the screen. This comes right from Nestle-Aland's 27th edition. Here's 1 Corinthians 7:1. Here's peri in the Greek. Okay, so literally in 1 Corinthians 7:1, it's now concerning the things you've written about. Okay, so now concerning the things that you've written. All right, so again, not Jesus, but Paul is addressing the concerns that the Corinthians had. That's what he's doing. He's addressing the things that they wrote about. Let's do another one, 1 Corinthians 7:25, now concerning the virgins. Okay, so he's addressing now the issue with people who want to remain as virgins. Okay, again, it's now concerning. Does everyone see peri? It's actually in the Greek text, and he's really switching subjects. It's a paragraph break. That's what you have. You get to 1 Corinthians 8:1, peri day, now concerning the food sacrificed to idols. Okay, that's what you have. Again, it's a new subject. It's a paragraph break. It's accentuated and tipped. The audience is tipped off by peri day. So peri day, peri day, peri day. It's used all over the place. Okay, let me show you one from Matthew. Or I'm sorry, 1 Thessalonians first. 1 Thessalonians 5:1. Very important because remember, 2 verses earlier, Paul was talking about the rapture. That's 1 Thessalonians 4:17. Remember, he said we will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, right? The very next verse, verse 18 of 1 Thessalonians 4, he said, therefore comfort one another with these words. So right after talking about the rapture and the comfort the rapture brings, he says, peri day, now concerning the times and the epochs, and he says you have no idea. Okay, the chronos here, chronon, is chronological time, one moment after another. Chiron here is kairos, that's the significant moment. Okay, so whether it's the chronology or the significant moment, you have no idea. Why? Because the day of the Lord comes like a thief. Well, that's exactly the Jesus point in Matthew 24:36. You have no idea. So Paul is structuring his argument just as Jesus did. Why? Because he took his data right from Jesus. But again, notice peri day, peri day, peri day, peri day. It's addressing a new subject. Let me show you another one. This is Matthew itself, Matthew 22:31. Peri day, concerning, or now concerning is the way I like to render it, now concerning the resurrection of the dead. Okay, so remember he's addressing that with the Sadducees. All right, so again, he's showing that he's dealing with a subject of theirs that they had brought up. All right, now let's use Matthew 24:36, peri day. Okay, so why do our English versions, some of them like the NASB, I'm not wild about it, renders it but of? Well, no, that's not a good rendering. Peri day means now concerning. Now concerning the day, literally it would be that day and hour. Okay, so literally it's now concerning the day and the hour. All right, what does he say? No one knows. Now, why is that important? Because it shows us that he's dealing with a new subject. Up to verse 35, remember, he was dealing with all of the signs inside the 70th week. Now, peri day, he answers the first question. Now concerning the beginning of this rascal, the day and the hour that it comes, you have no idea. That's the point. Now, why am I laboring this? Why am I showing you peri day over and over? Because if you don't see that in the Olivet Discourse, if you don't see the chiastic structure, you're going to be always out in left field when it comes to the doctrine of imminence. All right, let me show you this is actually from I've got another one here, Mark 13:32. The reason I wanted to show you this one is because it's parallel to Matthew 24:36. The Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 and Mark 13, they're structured the same. Matthew has more details, but Mark and Matthew cover the same thing, and they use the same discourse marker. So again, up to this point, Mark has Jesus dealing with the second question, when. At peri day, he has Jesus answering the first question, when. Okay, so second question, prior to this, what are the signs? All of a sudden you get to Mark 13:32, peri day, now concerning what? The day and the hour. No one knows. All right, so let me just show you though, this is a quote from a pre-wrath book. So this is a teacher that I know well, and I want you to see what he writes in his book and how he structures peri day. Notice his quote here. He says, now learn the parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already come tender and put forth its leaves, you know that the summer is near. So you too, when you see all these things, recognize that it is near, right at the door. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But of that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. Does everyone see? This comes from page 100 of this man's book. And notice in this pre-wrath book, he's putting peri day at the end of a paragraph. Now, why is that a big problem? Well, it's a big problem because peri day denotes a subject change in the beginning of a paragraph. So if you're taking the writer, who is Matthew, the beginning of a paragraph, and you're putting it at the end of your paragraph, you're distorting the meaning of the text. Now, why does pre-wrath and post-trib and mid-trib and all these people do that? Well, because they don't like the implications of what peri day leads to. Because if in fact peri day leads to the chiastic structure of as I've laid out, then what's necessary is a pre-tribulational rapture and an imminent return of the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, so my point is, isn't this in some sense a form of malpractice to take a discourse marker that shows the beginning of a paragraph and you're writing a book on eschatology and you put it at the end of your paragraph? Are you then making the same point that Jesus was? No, I think you're making a different point. All right, so again, what I'm trying to point out is who's faithful to the actual discourse markers, and I'm showing you example after example after example. I'm not reading into it. I'm taking it right from the Greek text, peri day, peri day, peri day, peri day, peri day, and you can see that they're always the beginning, at least of a thought or a subject that it may be related to what's gone before, but it is a new thought, like a paragraph break. So why is this author of this pre-wrath book putting the quote at the end of his paragraph? But in fact, it should be the beginning of a paragraph. Notice what he's done then. He's blended the section where there are signs right into the section where there are no signs. And so he's literally taking signs that you can know and blending them into the section that you can't know. Now, what that does is it muddies the waters, because how can you know Matthew 24, 4 through 35 and not know at the same time in the same relationship, Matthew 24, 36 or 51? Well, he's not distinguishing between the beginning of the 70th week and what's inside the 70th week of Daniel. So that's the confusion that you see in many of the eschatological views. Okay, so the question I have for everyone is your eschatology biblical? How many times are you seeing on YouTube people pointing out what peri day means? If they're not, they're doing malpractice to you. It's like a mechanic who destroys your transmission, and another mechanic has to point out to you, hey, they're destroying your transmission, but if you don't listen, you're going to have your transmission destroyed over and over and over, and you'll never get it done right. That's what I'm showing you. There's malpractice being done by various eschatological teachers, and it's proven because I'm just taking this right from the Greek text. I have no other agenda other than to show you what the text is saying. Okay? All right, so with that, let me do a little reminder. A reminder before we talk more about the doctrine of imminence is that you have to understand that the Parousia, the technical term for the return of Christ, his second coming, is synonymous with the 70th week of Daniel. Now, why is that important? Well, because if you don't see that this 70th week is synonymous with the Parousia, then you'll always be confused when it comes to eschatology as well. Now, there's two facts that prove that the Parousia and the 70th week of Daniel are the same. Fact one, the Parousia is a complex event involving many days. It is not a single day event. How do we know that? How do we know the Parousia is in fact the 70th week of Daniel? In other words, it's not just one day. Remember, the Parousia is the technical term for coming. All right? So when many times I used to think, when I would see the term coming, well, that's one day. All right, well, think about it this way. When Jesus came the first time, was it one day? There was just one day, and that was all over. His first coming was done in one day. Well, of course, anyone, if you said that to anyone, they'd say, well, that's absurd. Well, that's how absurd it is thinking about Jesus Christ's return as being one day. But let me prove it to you biblically. Luke 17:26. Notice Jesus is recorded by Luke, who is inspired by the Holy Spirit to write every single word that he wrote. Okay, we believe as an evangelical something called verbal plenary inspiration. Every word and the whole thing is inspired. All right, so Luke 17:26, it says, just as it happened in the days of Noah, so will be also in the days plural, it's plural in the Greek, the days plural of the Son of Man. What I am claiming to you is that it is identical in the Greek, except Matthew 24:37, notice he says, for the parousia of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. It's identical. The only difference is the parousia singular here is days plural here. What's the point? The parousia singular is synonymous with the plurality of days. This is a complex event. So now we know that the parousia isn't just one day. It's a complex event filled with many days. Fact number 2. So that's what you have here. The Parousia are the days. But fact number 2, Matthew's Olivet Discourse, that's Matthew 24, is about the Parousia. How do we know that the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24 is about the Parousia? Because Parousia is used in Matthew 24:37, it's used in Matthew 24:27, it's used in Matthew 24:37, it's used in Matthew 24:39. It's used 4 times. And we know that Matthew 24 is about the 70th week of Daniel. Why? Because in Matthew 24:15, Jesus mentions the abomination that causes desolation. Well, when is that? Well, that's right here. Okay, Matthew 24:21, Jesus says he is referring to the worst time period ever. Remember, he says, upon the world comes such tribulation such as never occurred nor ever will. Well, that can't be before that during the church age, and it certainly can't be during the millennial kingdom that comes after it. Is the millennial kingdom the worst time period ever? No, it's going to be the greatest time period ever. Is the worst time period found in the church age? No, it's found in the 70th week of Daniel. So this shows us that in the Olivet Discourse, we're dealing with the 70th week of Daniel. But in Matthew 24:3, 27, 37, 39, we're also dealing with the Parousia. Therefore, what? If the Parousia is a plurality of days, it must be the days synonymous with the 70th week of Daniel. Okay, why is that important? What I'm showing you is that when we talk about the Parousia or the 70th week of Daniel or the day of the Lord, they are synonymous. The beginning of which is the rapture. Why? Because the church will be removed, then God's wrath is poured out. How do I know that? Well, because Jesus in both Luke and Matthew use Noah. Noah was removed in the ark, then the wrath came. Some of you might say, well, wait a minute, Eric. Noah was removed in an ark, but he kind of was preserved through the flood. Okay, if you don't like that example, then use Lot. Because Jesus uses Lot in Luke 17 as well. And he says the very day that Lot went out of Sodom, then the fire and the brimstone came. Lot was removed just as Noah was removed. Then the wrath came. So the point is, before the 70th week of Daniel comes, which is the wrath of God, the church is going to be removed. The reason I'm laboring this is in Matthew 24:36, because of peri day, Jesus is talking about the beginning of this time period. And what he says 4 or 5 different ways is no one knows. You have no idea when it's going to break forth. You and I are living sometime prior to it in the church age. How close to this time period are we? We have no idea. Are we 5 days away, 5 weeks away, 3 hours away, 100 years away? We have no idea. That's the idea. That's the idea that we have to have in our heads if we're going to understand the doctrine of imminence and what the scriptures are really teaching. Okay, now with that, let me move a little bit. Again, here I want to show you 70th week of Daniel, synonymous with the Parousia, the plurality of days. Okay, let me keep moving though for the sake of time. I want to talk about the New Testament data on imminence. And what I'm going to show you is that there's a lot of data in the scriptures that teach us that this Parousia, and again, the Parousia is synonymous with the 70th week of Daniel. Remember, I just proved that to you, that that is imminent. Let me give you an example. James 5, 7 through 8. Notice James says, therefore be patient, brethren, until the Parousia. So let's stop there. Let's take and apply what we've just learned. We've just learned in the previous slide that the Parousia is synonymous with the future 70th week of Daniel, the last 7 years. That's what we've learned. Okay, well notice he says, you have to be patient, brethren, until the Parousia, that's this time period, of the Lord. The farmer waits, he says, for the precious produce of the soil. Be patient about it until it gets the early and late rains. You too be patient, strengthen your hearts, for the Parousia of the Lord is near. So this is near. Well, how near is it? Well, you don't know. Why don't you know how near it is? Because although you know it's certain to come, you don't have the date of when it's coming. That's the doctrine of imminence. The term near there is a term that has to do with imminence. The term for coming that you see is Parousia. The term for near there, ingitzo, means at hand. It's imminent. Why? Because it's near. You have no idea how near it is. Is it 5 seconds near, or is it 500 years near? You have no idea. It is always at hand. In fact, that's the way I would render this. I would render it, you too be patient, strengthen your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. That's the implication of near for an unknown event. It's certain to happen, but you have no idea when it's going to happen. It is the next event, as it were, on God's redemptive calendar concerning the movement of Jesus Christ from heaven to earth. Okay, that's the idea. All right. Now, what I do is I want to talk a little bit about the confusion that people have over imminence. And I have a friend I adore, by the way. He has a different view than I do. And by the way, as I want to mention something just about tenor. And if someone has a different view on the rapture, you're okay in my book. To me, the bigger issue in eschatology is the debate over the millennium. Okay, why? Because that sets the church on a whole different course. The best way to put the millennial issue is if you're premillennial, you believe that Jesus is coming to establish Israel. If you're post-millennial, you believe you have to build Israel. If you're amillennial, you think you are Israel. If you think you're Israel, well, of course you're going to baptize babies. Why? Because Israel circumcised babies. You have a whole different type of ecclesiology. That is the way you do church. All right? So eschatology matters when it comes to the millennium. When it comes to the timing of the rapture, I don't think that it's nearly as important as the millennium. However, the reason why I want to labor the pre-tribulational point is not because I don't like the fact that someone has a different view. It's because I want you to say, you know what, I can have certainty. The one issue that I've had over the years was that a lot of people, I think, claim, well, who can know what the end times are really teaching? Therefore, any view is valid, and therefore we really can't know. Let me put it this way. John MacArthur, some years ago, he asked the question, if you and I as believers in Jesus Christ claim to believe in the perspicuity of Scripture, that means the clarity of Scripture, then why are there so many different ideas about the end? Okay, in other words, he asked the question, has God muddled the ending? And I think most Christians just think, well, yeah, the end times just aren't clear. No, I think the end times are clear. I'm trying to defend the clarity of the Scriptures. What I'm claiming is that it is clear human beings have muddied the waters. It really isn't as difficult as people make it out to be once you get your categories down. All right, that's my point in it. So if you have some other view, fine. I think you're somewhat confused, but you're still a brother and sister in my book. Okay, what I'm claiming to you, though, is for those that are pre-trib, I want to give you reasons why you can know that you can know so you can be settled. You don't have to live like the postmodern generation that says, well, who can know that? One person has this view, another person has that view. Wait, no one can ever know. No, I'm not that way. I never have been that way. I couldn't be that way as an airline pilot. You can't survive being a postmodern airline pilot. Okay, you wouldn't make it. You can't say, well, if someone wants to fly this airspeed on final and that guy wants to fly that airspeed on final, well, who am I to argue? It doesn't work that way. You'll die very quickly. Okay, so let's begin. Here's the confusion. I have a friend that has this view, and he says, come on, Eric, imminent doesn't mean imminent, and you take this idea of near meaning imminent when it doesn't mean that. And he'll say this, he'll put up in his book, John 11:55, where it says, now the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. And so his argument would be, hey, Eric, why are you using the term near in claiming that that means the Parousia is near or imminent, when in fact the very same term in Greek for near is used for the Passover, and certainly the Passover is not an imminent event. Well, the way I would respond to that is he's really comparing apples and oranges. Okay? So for example, James 5:8, it says, for the Parousia of the Lord is near, ingus. Well, here, the Passover of the Jews was near, and yet the Passover wasn't imminent, and I'm claiming the Parousia, the coming of the Lord, is imminent. But yet the same term near is used for both. So does my friend who is pre-wrath, does he have a point? Hey, Eric, why are you claiming this is imminent when you don't claim that this is imminent? Because if near means imminent with the Parousia, why doesn't near mean imminent for the Passover? Well, again, my rebuttal to that is that when you're comparing the Passover to the coming, the Parousia, you're comparing apples to oranges. They're two different animals altogether, two different fruits. All right, why? Well, because the Passover is a known date. Dear ones, the Passover, that rascal comes every 14th day of Nisan. So you could look at your calendar and say, yep, it's the 12th day of Nisan. The Passover is near. In fact, you would know how near. It's 2 days away. But when we say that the Parousia of the Lord is near, well, how near is it? Well, you don't know. Now, why don't you know? Well, because the Parousia is an unknown date. That's what Jesus' point is in Matthew 24:36. No one knows. All right? So when we say the Parousia of the Lord is near, yeah, if you had a date for it, it would no longer be an imminent event, just like the Passover. You could look at your watch and your calendar and say, yes, that day has not drawn. It's how many days away? But that's not the point. The point is you have no idea when it's going to happen. So when the author of the scriptures, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, takes an event that you have no idea of the date of it and says that it's near, that's what gives you imminence. How near? We're living, brothers and sisters, after the first coming of Christ. We're living in the last days, also referred to oftentimes by scholars and theologians and Christians in general as the church age. So where are we in the church age? Are we smack dab in the middle of it? I have no idea. Are we 1 day away from the Parousia, the 70th week of Daniel? Remember, the 69th week of Daniel really ended just prior to the death of Christ. So we're living, and by the way, there's an intended gap in Daniel chapter 9, 24 through 27. I'll be coming to that at some point in our studies. We're living in that gap between the 69th and the 70th week of Daniel. We call it the church age. Some people call it the time of the Gentiles, or you could call it the last days. But where are we in it? You have no idea. Are you a day away from the Parousia? Is it tomorrow? I have no idea. All I know is it's near, it's at hand, it's imminent. That's the idea. And so, dear ones, we can't take a known date and then use that to disprove an unknown date. All right? That's the mistake I think that people are making. No, when the Parousia is said to be near, you have no idea how near it is. That's the doctrine of the New Testament. It is perpetually at hand. And this time period is a perpetual threat to the unbeliever. Because remember, it's going to be a time of God's wrath. As soon as a person dies, as it says in Hebrews 9:27, it's appointed once for a man to die. After that comes judgment. And so this is a wrathful event that's hanging over their head. But it's also a blessed event for those who believe. Why? Because we're taken to be with the Lord. And we're spared this time period. And at the end of it, we get our kingdom with Christ reigning upon the earth with us as we rule and reign over the nations. All right, so again, the Parousia, the 70th week of Daniel, is a blessed hope and promise for the believer, but it's also an imminent threat against the unbeliever. But in both cases, it's imminent. All right? All right, now, what I want to show you is that imminence is everywhere in the New Testament. It's in all sorts of scriptures. Let's look at several of them, many of them. Let's look at Romans 13:12. Here Paul says, the night is almost gone, and the day is near. Therefore, let us lay aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. When Paul says the night is almost gone, what's he really referring to? He's really referring to the time of the Gentiles, the church age, or the last days that we're living in. Why? Because they're times of great difficulty for those who believe. All right? According to 2 Thessalonians 1, there's going to be a reversal in the 70th week of Daniel, where those who put us in affliction during this church age, they themselves will be afflicted, but we will be comforted. Why? Because we're going to be resurrected and raptured. All right? So when he says that the day is near, what's he referring to? The day of the Lord. Well, what is the day of the Lord? Well, the day of the Lord is the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. So he's talking about this same time period as the Parousia, the 70th week of Daniel, and he says, notice what? The day is near. Well, how near? Again, you don't know. Is it 1 day away, 1,000 days away, 500 days away, 5 seconds from now? You have no idea. You have no idea where you are in the church age. You have no idea. It's just near. It's at hand. It's imminent. That's the idea that you see all over the scriptures. And unless you understand the Olivet Discourse and the discourse markers and see how that's structured, see, if you look at the Olivet Discourse and you say, well, wait, all of the signs we know exactly when Jesus is coming, you won't believe in the doctrine of imminence at all. But when all of a sudden you see the proper chiastic structure, you wait a minute, no one knows when the 70th week is going to come. All of a sudden now you're prepared to see what's really being taught in the scriptures. What? That's imminence. Imminence is really taught in the scriptures, dear brothers and sisters. It's completely a doctrine that's almost been jettisoned by the church at large. It's almost been completely jettisoned. People have no idea. It's not taught. It's not even referred to in many evangelical circles anymore. Why? Because people have been, in my opinion, so misled in the understanding of what the Olivet Discourse is really teaching. Okay, let's keep going. 1 Peter 4:7, Peter says, the end of all things is near, therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. The end of all what things? Well, the things as we know it in the church age. Why? Because in the 70th week of Daniel, everything's different. When the Messiah comes, you and I are going to be raptured. Do you know that you have nothing to fear when you're raptured? Now, you might say, well, you have nothing to fear now. I get it. I get it. We shouldn't fear at all. We shouldn't have a spirit of fear. I get it. But my point is, in our human frailty, we still do, don't we? At the time that we are raptured and resurrected, everything's different for us. Everything's new. The end of all things as we know it is at hand. It's near. How near? We have no idea. We have no idea. Is it a day away, a month away? We have no idea. Why? Because it's an unknown time. Jesus says no one knows the day or the hour. So again, notice the day of near, that's the day of the Lord. The end of all things is near. Let's look at some others. Hebrews 10:25. This is the call to the assembling to the church. He says, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Well, notice here the day is what? The day of the Lord. It's drawing near. Well, how near are we to it? We don't know. Are we 5 days away from it? Are we 5 months, 5 years, 5? We have no idea. That's the idea that you find in the scriptures. It is always at hand. Remember, an imminent event does not have to occur within any certain time frame. And there is nothing that needs to precede it, although there can be events that do precede it. They just don't have to. That's the point of an imminent event. Will certain things occur prior to the 70th week? We don't know that because the next moment can be the 70th week of Daniel. Okay? Are there events that could occur? Certainly, but we have no idea. We have no idea when the 70th week will come. It's near. It's near. It's near. How near? You don't know. That's the idea in the scriptures. Revelation 1:3. Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it. For what? The time is near. The time for what? Well, the time, as we get to Revelation chapter 6 all the way to chapter 19, it's all about the 70th week of Daniel. How near is this time period? You have no idea. The day is near. The end of all things is near. The day is drawing near. The time is near. I think it's near. But the idea, again, as I would lay it out, is it is at hand. The preterist will say, well, that means it had to happen by the year 70 AD. They're not understanding imminence. An imminent event can occur at any time, but it does not have to occur within any certain time frame. Okay, that's the doctrine of imminence. What do you need for an event to be imminent? The certainty of the event and the unknowability of when the event occurs. That's what you have to have. And we have both for the Parousia. That's what we have. All right, let me show you a Revelation. Revelation 1:3. Notice he says, blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. Well, interestingly enough, that's exactly what you see at the end of the book. Revelation 22:10. He says, and he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near. Brothers and sisters, the whole book of Revelation is bracketed by imminence. Why? Because the events of Revelation chapter 6 through 19 are about this imminent event. That forms the core of the book. Okay? Well, then when you get to chapters 20 through 22, that's after the 70th week of Daniel. Okay? When you're talking, so remember, the way it was structured, John was told the things that are, or excuse me, the things that were past, the things that are, and the things that will be. Well, the things that will be in the future form the major section of the book, which is all about the 70th week of Daniel. Okay, so my point is in Revelation 1, Revelation 22, bracketing the entire book of Revelation, you see this idea of imminence. Why? Because the core of the book is about the 70th week of Daniel, which is an imminent proposition. All right, let me give you another example. Revelation 1:1. It says the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John. Notice the term must. That's the term day. DEI, if you're to transliterate it into English. So this isn't peri day, DE, but this is DEI, day. And this day literally has to do with the divine necessity. So it is the divine necessity that these things will take place soon. Well, again, the core of the book is the 70th week of Daniel from Revelation 6 to 19. So the things that must take place by divine necessity of the 70th week of Daniel are imminent. Tachos. Now you might say, okay, Eric, well, what's the big point? Well, the big point is, again, the whole book of Revelation is bracketed on that idea. Revelation 22:6, and he said to me, these words are trustworthy and true, for the Lord, the God of the spirits of the prophets, has sent his angel to show his servants what must, day, here's the divine necessity, soon, tachos, take place. Again, Revelation 1 and Revelation 22 are bracketed by the things that must take place soon. They're imminent. They can happen at any moment. Why? Because we're living in the last days during the church age. Brothers and sisters, imminence is all over the Bible. And yet, as I'm going to show you, the only position that really gives you imminence is the pre-trib, premillennial position. So why is there so much confusion over the doctrine of imminence? Because pre-trib and premillennialism is under attack, mainly because we on our side have given such bad ideas over the years, like having conferences where we take newspapers out and we say, well, look at all these signs that are occurring, and yet we claim to believe in an imminent rapture. We claim, if you know your eschatology, that the signs are inside the 70th week, and yet we focus only on the newspaper clippings of that which is occurring in the church age. And so obviously, amillennialists, smart guys like Vodi Bakum, they're going to look at us and say, hey, you guys keep looking at things in the church age, yet you claim that this is an imminent event where all the signs are in here. How can this be imminent if you're looking at signs in the church age? See, they get it, but our side doesn't. So that's one of the problems with people on our side, is we've been given bad answers. And so many people have been turned off. The other reason is there's been a lot of misunderstanding, bad teaching in the church at large. We were decimated by the emerging church, post-modernity, the seeker-sensitive movement prior to that. There hasn't been a lot of solid exegesis and exegetical work showing what the Bible actually says. Okay, so that's what I endeavor to change. And again, I'm not saying I'm the only one out there, but it's getting fewer and fewer out there. When's the last time you had anybody tell you on YouTube what peri day means? Well, sadly, I wish there was hundreds of people telling you what it means and we could robustly debate it. I don't know of any other teacher on YouTube that I've seen that talks about it, sadly. Okay, so with that, let's keep going. Revelation, dear ones, is built on the doctrine of imminence. You have to see this. Notice here, Daniel 2:28. Now, what was Daniel 2 about? Remember, that was about the 4 successive kingdoms that would come about: the Babylonian, the Medo-Persian, the Greek, and the Roman Empire. But then after that, you would have a revival of a Roman-like empire in which you would have the Antichrist would come. That is still in our future. That's what will occur in this 70th week of Daniel. After that, the Messiah would bring about his kingdom as he fights it out here in the 70th week of Daniel, pouring his wrath out. That would be the kingdom that would be without end. That's what was being revealed to Nebuchadnezzar by the prophet Daniel, when Daniel was given this by the Lord. So notice here what Daniel says. He says, however, there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. That's how Daniel could reveal. Remember the mystery of the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had? And it says, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar the things that must take place in the last days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. Now you might be saying to me, okay, Eric, what's the point? Well, there's a big point here. Daniel 2:28, this is the Septuagint, meaning in the Greek translation of the Old Testament. I want you to notice the phrase, the things that must take place in the last days. Remember, I just showed you on the previous slide, the term must means divine necessity. Okay, so these are the things that must take place by divine necessity when? In the last days. All right, now why am I laboring this? Because Revelation 1:1 is built off of that. It's built off of that. Okay, notice what it says. John reveals, he says, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his bondservants, the things which must take place soon. And he sent and communicated it by the angel to his bondservant John. It's word for word identical to what you see in the red in Daniel 2:28. Why? Because it's about the same time period. It's about the same glorious messianic kingdom that will come. All right, but I want you to see a big difference. Notice here, in Daniel's day, remember Daniel wrote prior to the cross. Daniel's over here. He's living prior to the cross. Does everyone see that on the timeline? Where did Daniel live? Did he live during the cross and after? No, he was prior to the cross. Does everyone see that? Okay, listen carefully. He reveals that these are the things that must take place in the last days. Okay, the last days happen from the first advent to the second advent. When are the last days? They're from the first advent to the second advent. Okay, those are the last days. Well, you and I now are living in the last days. Why? Because Christ came. So when Revelation 1:1 was written, we were living after the cross in the last days. John wrote this in 95 AD. That's when he wrote Revelation. When is he? He's living in the last days. That's why he says these are the things which must take place. What? Soon. It's no longer in the last days. Why? Because we're in the last days. So now that you're living in the last days, the things that must take place, the 70th week of Daniel and the glorious kingdom are what? They're at hand. They're imminent. That's the doctrine of imminence built right off of Daniel 2:28. What used to be pushed off to the last days is now soon and at hand. Okay? Now, how do we know that we're living in the last days? Well, for example, Hebrews 1:1 through 2, the writer of Hebrews says, God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers, in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. Okay, so notice, ever since Christ came, we've been living in what? These last days. So the last days began at the first advent of Christ, his coming, his perfect life, his death on the cross, his resurrection, his ascension, and the subsequent outpouring of the Spirit. That's all represented here. That's the last days. In other words, that brings in the last days. We've been living in the last days until what? The second advent of Christ. Are you with me? So because now we're living in the last days, the events that Daniel had foretold regarding the coming of the Messianic kingdom is no longer pushed out to the last days. It is now imminent. It is soon. Tacos. Why? Because it's near. That's the idea. Revelation 1:1 and Revelation 22 bracket the entirety of the book of Revelation with the doctrine of imminence. Brothers and sisters, I saw Vodi Bakum, who I adore, by the way. I think he's a brother in Christ, but he's an amillennialist. And he was giving everyone in recent months his understanding of the book of Revelation. And he was talking about how the book of Revelation is built off of the Old Testament, but he never made the connection between Daniel 2:28 and how indeed the things that must take place in the last days are now depicted as those that must take place soon. He completely missed the doctrine of imminence that is inherent to the text of Scripture. What I'm telling you is that when you really unpack what the Scriptures are saying, imminence is all over the place. I'm giving you just a snidbit of it. So that's what actually kept me in the pre-tribulational camp. Do you know, for many years, as a Christian, I was an airline pilot, a flight instructor. I was a busy boy. And I didn't have time to get into Greek and understanding all the grammatical constructions. I could not understand the Olivet Discourse either. I couldn't make a lick of sense out of it. How can you have signs of things that you can know, and all of a sudden you come to a section where you can't know? And I couldn't make any sense of it until I discovered peri, the discourse marker, the grammatical construction that shows us Jesus switching topics. All of a sudden it dawned on me. But what kept me in the pre-tribulational camp was I knew the New Testament taught the doctrine of imminence. Once you see the chiastic structure, the understanding of the Olivet Discourse as I've showed you, imminence comes alive. The chiasm makes sense of the doctrine of imminence. Again, Jesus was answering two questions. The two questions: when will these things happen? What will be the sign of your parousia? Remember, they assumed the end of the age would happen at the coming, so therefore it's really just one question here. So when will these things happen? When will the entire 70th week come? And what will be the sign of your coming? So what Jesus does from Matthew 24:4 through 35 is he answers the second question, and all of the signs are inside the 70th week. But all of a sudden in verse 36, peri day, now concerning the beginning of this, the day and the hour, no one knows. No one knows when the 70th week will come. So Matthew 24, 4 to 35, all your signs are inside the 70th week. Matthew 24, 36 through 51, when does the 70th week begin? No one knows. You have no idea. It's near. How near? Well, you have no, is it 5 seconds? 5 minutes? 500 years? Is it, you have no idea. That's the idea. I can just go on and on. You have no idea. You have no idea. And that's what creates imminence. Brothers and sisters, is the parousia, the return of Jesus Christ to rapture the church, certainly going to occur? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you know when? You have no idea. I don't, you don't, no one does. It's a unifying theme. We have no idea. Therefore what? It's imminent. An imminent event does not have to occur within any certain time frame. And an imminent event does not have to have precursors happen prior to it, but events can occur prior to it. They don't have to, but they can. An imminent event is just an event that must happen. It's a certainty, but you have no idea when. That's what we have with the parousia of Christ. The rapture of the church occurs. Then you have the pouring out of God's wrath upon the world, just like what happened in the days of Noah. Noah was removed in the ark, the wrath came. Lot was removed out of Sodom, the wrath came. The people of God will be removed, then the wrath comes. That's the same idea that's being taught in the Olivet Discourse. The Olivet Discourse, as understood this way, preserves and teaches the doctrine of imminence. Brothers and sisters, I hope everyone sees these things, and I hope people are convinced of them. Let me leave you with one last slide. Let's talk about imminence and specifically the rapture views. What I'm claiming is the only view that really lends itself to imminence is the pre-tribulational view. Let me prove that to you. First of all, let's look at post-tribulationalism. Post-tribulational views say the rapture occurs at the end of the 70th week. Remember, they believe that we're caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and we immediately come down. We never go to heaven. Well, right away, I think that violates John 14, 1 through 3. Because in John 14, 1 through 3, Jesus uses a passage that's used in the rapture verses of Matthew 24, 40 through 41, which is par lambano, that we're going to be received to be with the Lord where he is. Well, where is he going to prepare a place for us in John 14, 1 through 3? Well, it's obvious it's in heaven. Remember, he says, if I go, I will prepare a place for you so that when I come again, I'll receive you to myself so that where I am, there you may be also. Where is Jesus going to prepare a place for us? Picture this as heaven. It's going to be up here. Okay? So right away, post-tribulationalism rejects that. The other problem is, can this be imminent? Well, of course it can't be imminent. Let's remember the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel begins with the Antichrist, that is the apostasy, everyone gives their allegiance to him. He comes and conquers, and then you have the greatest warfare on the earth that leads to a death of a fourth of the planet. Okay, how do we know that? Because Revelation 6:8 says that at the fourth seal, a fourth of the earth dies due to sword, famine, pestilence, wild beasts. By the way, that was the wrath of God, according to Ezekiel 14, 19 through 21. Since Revelation is built off of the Old Testament, what the writer is doing is showing us that's the wrath of God at the beginning with the warfare at the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. So you would see a death of a quarter of the earth's population. The world had given their allegiance to the Antichrist. Well, then you also come to the point where he sets himself up in the temple. The Antichrist will reign from the temple for how long? For 42 months. So how could you say that the parousia, remember to the post-tribulationists, the parousia is only one day. It's the day that Christ returns for us. It's right here. Okay, well, how can that be imminent in light of all of the signs that would tip you off? As soon as you saw the Antichrist revealed, you would know it's 7 years later. As soon as the Antichrist set himself up in the temple, performing the abomination that causes desolation, you would know that he's returning 1,260 days later. Well, of course you know the day and the hour. So is that an imminent event? No. Because therefore it can't occur at any time. Okay? You would know exactly when it's going to occur. All right. Therefore, it's no longer an unknown date once these events occur. Therefore, it's not an imminent event. All right. Let's look at pre-wrath. The pre-wrath view says that the rapture of the church occurs sometime in the last 3.5 years. Okay. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, again, the problem with that is if you go to the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel, you have the wrath of God being poured out clearly. At the second seal, you have peace taken from the earth. Well, the day of the Lord comes while they're saying peace and safety. Well, you can't have peace and safety and not peace and safety at the same time and in the same relationship. So if the day of the Lord begins while they're saying peace and safety and then sudden destruction comes upon them, you can bet there's a big distinction between the beginning of the 70th week and that which preceded before. Because during the 70th week of Daniel, you lose a quarter of the earth's population in the opening wars. So that would give you a sign that you're within, what, months or years of the return of Christ sometime in the last 3.5 years. Okay, what's more, when the Antichrist would set himself up in the temple and declare himself to be God, now you know Jesus is coming within 1,260 days. That's no longer an imminent event. Why? Because now you know the time frame as to exactly when he's coming. 1,260 days, you know he's coming within the 42 months, and therefore it can't be imminent. The other thing about imminence is the event can occur at any time. Okay, can you say that Jesus Christ is going to rapture the church at any time at this point? Well, of course not. Of course he can't come. He cannot come today. He can't come for you. Why? Because you haven't seen the Antichrist and you haven't seen the other signs. It's no longer an imminent event. Let's look at mid-tribulationalism. Mid-tribulationalism says that we're raptured here. Again, the problem with that is you have the signs that occur prior in the first 3.5 years, the beginning of the birth pangs. You have the wars, the rumors of wars. Remember, people say, well, we've always had wars. Not like these. You've never lost 25%. 1 out of every 4 people. Think about it. Take a family of 4. Take a family of 4 people. 1 out of every 4 of them will be dead in this time period. That's how bad it is. Take a family of 8. 2 out of those 8 people will be dead during this time period due to sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. That's how bad it's going to be. So that will obviously tip you off that, in fact, you're 3.5 years away until the Messiah returns. What's more, we know that during this time period, there's going to be earthquakes. There's going to be earthquakes that are so severe that even the unregenerate know that this is indeed the wrath of God. Okay, so of course you're going to have signs that will tip you off as to the Messiah coming. All right, the only view that preserves the doctrine of imminence is pre-tribulationalism. Why? Because that's talking about the beginning of the Parousia, the 70th week of Daniel. And what do we say about that according to Matthew 24:36? When will these things be? Jesus addresses that in Matthew 24:36. Peri days is now concerning the day and the hour. The day and the hour of what? The day of the Lord and the hour of trial. You have no idea. It's like the days of Noah. In Noah's day, what happened? The people were removed. The wrath came. Since the wrath is present at the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel, we have to be raptured there. This preserves the doctrine of imminence. You have no idea when this is going to come about. You'll be raptured out. You'll meet the Lord in heaven. That's where you're going to meet him in the air. He'll bring you to heaven, the place that he's prepared for you, while the wrath of God is poured out, and then you'll come again. This is all part of the one parousia. You'll return to set up his kingdom. But this is the only view, pre-tribulationalism, that preserves the doctrine of imminence, where you can rightly say, this event is certain to occur, number 1, but I have no idea when it will occur. All these other views, you will be tipped off by events within the 70th week as when they will occur. That's why Jesus gave you signs. So, with that, dear brothers and sisters, I hope that you see that when we tie our understanding of the Olivet Discourse to peri day, the chiasm, and we understand that, in fact, the 70th week of Daniel is an imminent proposition, we start seeing that pre-tribulationalism is the only thing that preserves the doctrine of imminence. Don't be confused. Don't be led astray, brothers and sisters. The Bible really does teach the doctrine of imminence, and the pre-tribulational position is what upholds it. We'll see you next time on End Times with Pastor Eric.